What's up? What's up? What is up? What's going on, everybody? Today we have another math video for you, you rock stars. Today we're going to be talking about what is congruency. Exciting times. Hey, do you guys know where I could find the Little Mermaid? Yeah, under the sea. Well, today we're going to talk about how to determine line segments and angles and polygons if they are congruent or not, which you're going to learn about right now. Okay, so what is this congruent or congruency thing I speak of? That's when things have the same shape and size, and you're allowed to flip, and we're allowed to flip them to make them rotate around, but they have the same shape and the same size. And there's kind of different ways to look at them when we're talking about angles or segments or shapes. But the big thing is it's the exact same shape and they are the exact same size. So a polygon is our next vocabulary word. A polygon is a two-dimensional closed shape, okay? So in all the lines, once they're all straight lines, and they all have to connect at one point. So they can't be an open shape where two lines don't actually connect at the end. All of these are polygons that you're looking at on your screen right now. We have a rectangle, we have a triangle, we have a pentagon, we have a parallelogram, and some other shapes. But you notice that all the sides are straight and all the sides connect, okay? That's a polygon. Two-dimensional, which means it's flat. It doesn't have depth. Segment or a line segment, okay? That is a part of a line bounded by two endpoints. So what that means by when they say part of a line that's bounded by two endpoints, what that means is it doesn't keep going. All right, this line stops where those two endpoints are. So a line looks like that and does not go on forever. Angles, that's the amount of turning between two rays. So if you can like imagine, you can actually take your hand and clasp them together like this, and you can open them up. And so see how they open up and form an angle? This is the amount of degrees that they open, and these things are called two rays. So a ray is a kind of like a line segment, okay, but it stops at one end, okay, so it's got to stop at one end, it goes on forever in the other direction. And so if we had another one, it would go this way. So it's two rays that meet at the vertex, okay, they meet at the vertex and they open to form an angle. Okay, so let's understand some congruency here. What needs to be true for shapes to be called congruent? This is real important. Underline it, write it down somewhere. What has to happen for two shapes to be congruent, or any amount of shapes, really? They have to be the same shape. So a triangle and a circle, hint, 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 are not congruent. They have to be the same shape. And they also have to be the same size. So if you're going to do two triangles, you can't have one the size of Earth and the other one the size of an ant. They have to be the same size. All the angles have to be congruent. So the angles that correspond on a shape have to be congruent. So the top of a triangle in one, let's say it's 37 degrees. The top of the triangle in the other one has to be 37 degrees. Okay, so the angles that connect the shapes have to be congruent. And then the sides have to be congruent. The corresponding side is what we'll call it. So if you have a triangle and it is a really narrow looking triangle, and then you have another one over here that looks exactly the same, this side and that side have to be the same length. This side and that side have to be the same length, and so on and so on. So the sides have to be congruent, which have to be the same length of the corresponding side on the other shape. The angles have to be congruent of the corresponding angle. So this angle right here corresponds with that angle, and this angle corresponds with that angle, and this angle corresponds with that angle. So these two angles have to be congruent. These two angles have to be congruent or equal, have to be the same number in order for them to be congruent. Okay, and congruent angles. What needs to be true for angles to be congruent? The same angle degrees. That's it. So if I have this angle, and it's 57 degrees, in order for the other one to be congruent, it can turn, it can look different as long as the opening is still 57 degrees. Those are congruent angles. They're congruent. They're the same. What about segments? What has to be true for a line segment to be congruent? They just have to be the same length. Like if I got this guy right here, and he's 7.2 inches, and I get this guy right here, and he's 7.2 inches, 7.2 is the same thing as 7.2, right? Yep. They are congruent. Okay, so let's understand congruency a little bit more. Let's try a few. Now I got these two rectangles, okay? They're not facing the same direction, but they're two rectangles. And so let's put them through the test. Are they the same shape? Yeah, they're both rectangles. Are the angles congruent? Well, we have to see how that's labeled. Well, when you see angles look like that, it tells us that they're 90 degrees. And it looks like all the angles are congruent. So, but really what I'm looking for is this angle congruent to this angle? Yes. Is this angle congruent to this angle? Yes. You see what I'm doing? So they are congruent. So all the angles are congruent. So that's a big old check mark. Okay. Are the sides congruent? The way we check with sides is that you could get a ruler out and measure it, but in math, we do these little things called, they're little dashes that we can put, or hash marks. And what it says is if I put one dash, if I do that one dash right there on one of the sides, everywhere else that I put one dash, what I'm saying is they are all equal to each other. So that one is also equal to this one, which is also equal to this one, and it's also equal to this one. So those sides are congruent, which means the corresponding side. Remember when I told you that? This top here is congruent to this top. That works. This bottom here is congruent to that bottom. So far, that works. But then we got these other two. So now they have two dashes, which means it's a different length than the other ones, but are the corresponding sides congruent? So is this one equal to this one? Yep, they're both two dashes. Is this one equal to this one? Yep, they're both two dashes. So those are congruent as well. So are the sides congruent? The corresponding sides congruent? Bingo. Now, that means we have the same shape, the angles are congruent, and the sides are congruent. We have a congruent pair of rectangles. They are congruent to each other. What about this? Are they the same shape? Yes, they're both rectangles. Do they have the same angles? Yes, they are all 90 degrees. So far, we're rocking it. Are the sides congruent? No, you can tell without even doing the marks that this side right here and the corresponding side over here, those are way different from each other. They're a lot different lengths. So those sides are not congruent, so it is not a congruent pair of shapes. All right. What about these two? Are they the same shape? No, then they're not congruent. That's the easiest one, right? If they're not the same shape, then they're clearly not congruent. These are not congruent. So let's go on. Don't confuse congruent with similar. So similar, you're going to get into this a lot more as you get into math. What needs to be true for shapes to be similar? They have to be the same shape, and they have to be the same angles, but the sides don't have to be the same. They just have to be proportional. Meaning if one of the sides is twice as bigger than the other one, then the other one has to be twice as big. So let's look at some examples of this. These are similar, but not congruent. See, because this parallelogram, you can kind of tell right now that those two, like this one might be half the length of that one, and this is half the length of that one, and so on. So they are the same shape, they have the same angles, but they have their sides are not the same. They are proportional, and you can do it just looking like this. It's kind of like imagine taking your phone, and you know when you squeeze in and out like that, everything gets bigger and smaller at the same proportion. So this balloon animal is bigger than the other one. Are they the same shape? Yes. Are they the same size? No. So they are similar. And you can just look at all these and say, these are all similar because one's bigger than the other, but the shape stayed in the same proportion as it. Like, in other words, this face right here, this isn't a real tall cat. It's still the same proportion cat. All right, so let's fill in the blank. Congruent means that two items have the same shape, angles, and sides. So the same shape, the angles are equal to each other, the corresponding angles, and the sides are congruent to each other. Similar means that the two items have the same shape, but have different size, which means they're proportionally different. Okay. For segments to be congruent, what has to be equal for a segment? Just the length. And for angles to be congruent, what has to be equal? The degrees, the angle measurement. So 42 degrees, 90 degrees, whatever that might be. I think you understand congruency. Wrap it up. This lady's always yelling at me. What does Pooh Bear call his girlfriend? Honey.